Hey everybody, what's going on? This is David, or otherwise known as Gaming for Hope Online, and I wanted to come to you to answer, as the video title and thumbnail suggested, the one thing about the Bible that skeptics don't seem to have the answer to. Let's go ahead and get started. This is Hot Topics for Christianity. And here's the question. How do we know as Christians that the Bible is real? I mean, it was just written by a bunch of dudes, right? So how do we really know it's real? Come on. And as is common form for me in this particular series, is I like to try to do my best to give you a short answer to the question. So let me just kick it off with that. There are many ways in general for the Bible to be proven as accurate and infallible truth. The other thing that a lot of people want to ask is not just about whether or not the New Testament is still factual, the Old Testament is still factual, but if as a whole it was actually God-breathed. That's kind of a crazy concept to people who aren't believers, and I don't blame you. And I want to make sure I give you ample evidence to support the Bible. Give me a few more minutes of your time. We'll go into some more in-depth detail on some of the things, but we're going to kick things off with the New Testament and proving its accuracy through manuscripts. The New Testament, in case you didn't know, actually has over 5,000 copies of the original manuscripts still in existence today. Now, this compared to Homer's Iliad, which has 700 copies, and we actually use Homer's Iliad as a very big part of English in general education here in the United States. So, to give you a comparison, we're using something that has literally less than a fifth of the amount of copies to prove itself as something to educate people with. But couldn't we say that if it has 5,000 copies, that the Bible could also be used in a factually based educational stance? I would argue yes. And another fact that I want you to take into account to continue to support the evidence that the New Testament is, at least in and of itself, factual, we'll get to the Old Testament in a minute, is that all but 11 verses of the New Testament were quoted by early centuries scholarships that took place during early Christianity. So, when we look at that kind of a situation, and we fast forward to today and we think about today's scholars, if today's scholars are presented with something that is presented as fact, they will go, okay, I wonder if that's real. That's part of a scholarly mindset. They want to question everything, which is not a bad thing. They want to go ahead and look at it and go, okay, based on the current science, can we say that this is factual or not? The reality is, at that time, it could not be proven that any of these things were wrong, and in fact were so true that we wanted to quote them as scholars. And when I say we, of course, I'm not implying that I'm a scholar or that I'm anywhere near what the scholars were then. What I am implying is that we as a culture, our scholars were embraced at that time, and we took their opinion very highly. And when we look at that and we say they were willing to quote the scripture during the time that it was being written, that says quite a bit about the actual text itself. Here's the final point that I'd like to make that shows the New Testament's accuracy, and it actually comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 6. And hang tight, because I know a lot of you are like, oh, here goes the circular reasoning. No, this isn't circular reasoning. I'm not trying to prove the Bible's reality by the Bible. Hear me out. Again, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 6. After that being, if you look at the context of the passage, Jesus' resurrection, he was seen by over 500 brethren at once. Now, if that claim was in error, it would have been criticized and would not have withstood the stands of time. Somebody would have taken that out and said, that can't be real. We're done. There's no way that that's possible. It would have been heavily criticized. 500 people then was a lot more people than now. We think about 500 people now, and 500 people living in what we would refer to as a rural city, in the state of Idaho especially, is not really that uncommon. That's pretty much most small towns, right? But in their time, that was a lot of people. I mean, the proportions are off the charts to the amount of people that were alive during this time and now. So, putting it to scale, think about if 500,000 people at least saw Jesus' resurrection. Don't you think that 500,000 people would probably say something about it if it weren't true? I would like to say that if we're being honest with ourselves, somebody would have said something and it would have sparked the rest of them to stand up. Now, the reason that I chose to start with the New Testament's accuracy is if we can establish that the New Testament is fact, then we can also use the New Testament, now that we've established that it itself is factual, to establish the Old Testament, and here is how I get there. I'm going to refer to Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 and 18. Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot, the smallest letter, or one tittle, smallest stroke in Hebrew lettering, will by no means pass from the law until all is fulfilled. In that verse, Jesus refers to the law and the prophets, and the Old Testament is primarily about the law and the prophets, which is what he's referring to in that situation. Now, if he's willing to support what the majority of the Old Testament is about, the law and the prophets, that would begin to develop the idea that the Old Testament is probably pretty dang accurate, right? But don't stop yet and don't click away yet, because there's still one more thing I think is really important to consider. Most of us that study this topic are very familiar with the Dead Sea Scrolls. These were found in the mid to late 90s. I don't know the exact years, but they were found in the mid to late 90s. And when they were discovered, we found out that they were actually bits and pieces of the entire Old Testament, the original manuscripts for that part of the Bible. Upon retranslating them back into our current standards and languages, we have still found that our current translations of the Bible are actually accurate to the point that the manuscripts reflect what the current translations say. Now, this is going to beg the question from many of you watching that may be a skeptic yourself. Please know I don't mean any disrespect to you. This question is probably going through your mind. Okay, well, you've proven the Bible is real, but how many versions of the Bible are there, and which one of them is the most accurate? That question requires a little bit more time, and I don't want to put that answer in this video. I am actually planning on putting that in the next video coming out, so if you haven't already, do yourself a favor. If you'd like to have the answer to that question, click the subscribe button and make sure you ring the notification bell right next to it so you can get notified for when I upload that video, as well as many others that I continue to produce here on this channel. Moving on now, because we have successfully proven with just the manuscript type evidence, we've proven the New Testament, then proven the Old with the New Testament, and then proven the Old also with manuscripts. I want to move on to another question that kind of ties in with all this. It's very important. Okay, so we've proven that the Bible is in itself factually based, but how can we prove that this wasn't just a bunch of dudes writing this? How can we prove that this was actually God inspiring them to write these things? I gotta be honest with you, I can't blame you for asking that question. When I was first looking into Christianity and deciding whether or not I wanted any part of it, I asked that same question myself. I'm like, who cares if it's factual? I want to know whether or not God, this God that they talk about in the Bible, actually said these things, or if it was just a bunch of guys seeking power through religion. That was the question that I asked, and I'm coming from the place of skeptic because that's who I used to be prior to finding the facts about Christianity. Okay, so in order to prove this, I want to bring to light that the fact that when the Bible is being translated, there were very, 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 very strict rules and guidelines that were required to be followed in order for it to be accepted and put into the Bible. And some people will dispute that we left things out, or we shouldn't have added some things and all this kind of stuff. We never added anything. There were things that didn't belong in the Bible that ended up being in the same physical location. The idea that all of that was the Bible just baffles me. There's no way that it had to all be the Bible because, you know, time and sands and dirt moving, and you understand. So what we had to do is we had to sort through all the things we found in the same physical location and determine whether or not those things belonged in the Bible. And this was a couple of the things that are major that really set apart that this had to have been God-breathed. One of the things that a lot of you that are Christians are going to want me to talk about that I won't in this video just yet, because I have plans for it and later down the road, is prophecy. Prophecy does prove the Bible in a big way, and I'm never going to dispute that. But we will get into that in another video, and if you'd like some further information, or maybe the video to be coming sooner than maybe I have planned, and something you really want the answer to, please let me know in the comment section below. Hey, David, I'd love to see that video showing prophecy proving the Bible's real. Let's move on. I'm just going to name a few of the guidelines here that I've written down because I don't have them all memorized because, you know, I wasn't translating the document, so I didn't need to. The document in question had to align with Christian truth that is recognized by the churches during the time of translation. Another requirement was that the document needed to be written either by an apostle or by someone that was in immediate proximity to the apostles. The reason for this is because the apostles were the closest to Jesus, and we can see that throughout history outside of the Bible. So we wanted to say, okay, if history speaks to the fact that the apostles The apostles were right around Jesus, and they wrote much of the Bible, and then people that were associated with them wrote even further. We should make sure that it was written by the apostles, prophets, etc., or those who were in immediate surroundings to them. Finally, the document's need to be generally accepted and used by churches was taken into a massive part of the consideration of all this. Essentially, they'd get to this part of the process where they'd go, okay, here is what we believe this to be true, and then they show this to the churches as a whole. The churches would go, yes or no. And by the time it got there, most of the time it was, absolutely, that's great, or I'd tweak this a little bit, and that's where you get a lot of the versions of the Bible. But I digress. Again, that's next video, and I'm getting a little too excited about it. Now that we've established that the Bible is, in fact, infallible truth, I want to encourage you to take a moment and click on that card right there and begin watching through the rest of the series if you have some time. And as you have time, I've talked about topics such as how God feels about the LGBT community, alcohol, tattoos and body mods, and even Mormonism in prior videos. And I highly encourage you to check those out, because now that we've, again, proven that God's word is true, that's what I use to prove all the things that I say about how God feels about those particular topics. So we're starting from a good foundation. I should have done this first, to be honest with you. If you have any further clarification, or maybe, just the support of, hey, I really loved this video, and you would like to tell me, you can do a couple of things. You can head to the comment section, obviously, first of all, which is most easily accessible to you, and let me know. The other thing you can do is you can check out my Twitch link, Discord link, as well as my combined social links. All of those are in the description down below. Please keep in mind I am live on Twitch for 36 hours every week, so you get the opportunity to come in and ask questions whenever. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Hot Topics for Christianity. My hope is that through it, the skeptics that came here would at least have some further education on the biblical truth, not necessarily the truth within the Bible, but the truth about the Bible that is so important in order to establish your faith. And I would hope that through this you'd start down that journey of trying to find out who God is. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave it a like. I really appreciate those. Feedback is super important to me. And until next time, this is Gaming for Hope, and I'm signing off.